7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public.
In the Judean Desert, where nothing should survive, the Dead Sea Scrolls outlived empires.
The Dead Sea Scrolls were first discovered between 1947 and 1956. They were found 12 miles east of Jerusalem, and they were also numbered according to the caves they came out of.
For decades, experts studied them, translated them, and believed their mysteries were solved.
We also do 28 exposures, each from a different angle. And so you get all the surface of the scrolls, both for preservation measures and for scholarship.
But a new wave of artificial intelligence has shattered that belief.
Were ancient texts, which very quickly they came to realize that these were incredibly important.
By rereading invisible ink, decoding handwriting lost to time, and piecing together what decay erased, AI has uncovered something that was never meant to be seen. The discovery that started it all. In 1947, a few Bedouin youths wandered through the cliffs above the Dead Sea with their goats. They were looking for a lost goat, and when they came across a dark hole in the rock, they did what bored teenagers do anywhere in the world. They threw a stone. The sound that came back wasn't the dull thud of sand or dust. It was the crisp, echoing crack of pottery breaking. That single shatter was the spark for one of the most extraordinary archaeological stories in modern history. Inside those jars were leather manuscripts that had not seen daylight in roughly 2,000 years.
The significance of the scrolls was initially lost on the people directly associated with them.
Over the next 10 years, 11 caves near the ruins known as Khirbet Qumran revealed their secrets. Khirbet is an Arabic word for ruin, and Qumran sits on a terrace above the Dead Sea's northwest shore, about a mile from the water, where caves open like keyholes in the chalky cliffs. Hundreds of manuscripts and tens of thousands of fragments came out of the darkness, some written on animal parchment, some on papyrus made from reeds, and one unlike any other, inscribed on hammered copper. The copper scroll was so brittle from corrosion that scholars eventually had to cut the metal into narrow strips to read its surface safely. At the heart of it was Khalil Iskander, Kando, a cobbler from Bethlehem, who also dealt in antiquities. His little shop became the crossroads where desert Bedouins brought their mysterious finds, and where scholars came to haggle, examine, and buy. Hebrew University archaeologist Eleazar Sukenik quickly recognized what he was seeing. He secured several of the first scrolls in 1947 before anyone else truly grasped their value. Soon after, French Dominican scholar Roland de Vaux led formal excavations at Qumran and nearby caves. There were no airtight contracts, no proper site logs, and no legal frameworks. Scrolls moved through a web of rumor, trust, and cash. Some pieces went straight to scholars. Others disappeared into private collections. So, where did these manuscripts finally end up? The most famous ones now rest in Jerusalem, beneath the smooth white dome of the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book. That gleaming dome was designed to look like the lid of the clay jars that once protected the scrolls. Across from the white dome stands a dark basalt wall. Together, they echo a theme from the ancient texts themselves, light against darkness, while the galleries below keep the scrolls in steady light and climate, so the skins don't dry, crack, or fade. The writing spans centuries, from around the 3rd century before the Common Era down into the 1st century of the Common Era. Scholars used paleography to date them. This simply means studying the style of handwriting and comparing it to other known examples from different eras. It pointed squarely to the final centuries of the Second Temple period, the same stretch of time that shaped early Judaism and set the stage for Christianity. But the real miracle is that anything survived at all. The Judean Desert is brutally dry, and that's what saved these manuscripts. The caves breathe only a little, so there are almost no swings in humidity. Some scrolls were stored in jars that kept insects, dust, and grit out. Together, that combination, dry air, still air, and clay jars, created a natural time capsule. Ironically, the scrolls survived for 2,000 years in perfect silence, only to start deteriorating the moment people tried to preserve them. In the late 1940s and 1950s, conservators used what they had: glass plates, cellophane tape, oil treatments, and bright lights. Those well-meaning fixes turned into damage. The skins darkened, the inks flaked, the adhesive left stains. That's why modern curators keep temperature and humidity tightly controlled and rely on photographers, not fingertips, to study each fragment. To understand how far the danger can reach, you need to travel about 20 miles south of Qumran to a place called Nahal Hever. Here, the cliffs grow even steeper, and one small ledge hides a cave now infamous as the Cave of Horror. Archaeologists gave it that name in the 1960s, when they found dozens of skeletons inside: men, women, and children.
Evidence of Roman encampments on the cliff above the cave suggests that the rebels remained under siege until they perished of starvation.
Believed to be refugees who died during the Bar Kokhba revolt almost 2,000 years ago. That revolt, led by Simon Bar Kokhba from 132 to 135 CE, was the last great Jewish uprising against Rome. The victims in the Cave of Horror likely died of starvation and exposure, while hiding from Roman troops who scoured the desert. In 2021, after years of organized searches meant to stop looters from stealing what was left, state archaeologists returned to that cave. What they pulled out stunned everyone. New fragments of scrolls containing Greek text from the 12 minor prophets, but with the name of God written not in Greek letters, but in ancient Hebrew script. It was the first genuine biblical scroll discovery in about 60 years. The Israel Antiquities Authority now runs a digital library where anyone can zoom in on high-resolution images of these fragments. You can study them in microscopic detail without ever touching the originals. This careful approach only came after a major embarrassment.
That the scrolls will be preserved for the coming generation.
When Washington, D.C.'s Museum of the Bible opened, it proudly displayed a small set of fragments it believed to be part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. For years, whispers in the scholarly community suggested that many fragments appearing on the market after 2002 might be fake. In 2020, a team funded by the museum itself confirmed the worst. Every single one of the 16 displayed pieces was modern. The leather was old, but the ink was new. Someone had skillfully forged the fragments using genuine ancient materials, and even trained experts had been fooled for years. So, how do labs actually confirm dates or link scraps that have been separated for millennia? Radiocarbon dating remains the backbone. In the early 1990s, teams in Zurich and Tucson ran accelerator mass spectrometry, an advanced version of radiocarbon analysis, on selected fragments. Accelerator mass spectrometry counts the carbon-14 atoms directly, allowing precise dating with samples as small as a few milligrams. No need for big destructive cuts from the parchment. The calibrated results lined up beautifully with the handwriting styles that paleographers had already identified. The takeaway was clear. These texts genuinely belonged to the late Second Temple era, not to medieval copyists or modern tricksters. Radiocarbon dating isn't foolproof. It can be thrown off by contamination, but it gives a statistical window. When early scholars first unrolled those strips of leather and papyrus, before digital imaging, before DNA analysis, and long before artificial intelligence, what did they actually read? What words reached human eyes for the first time in 2,000 years? The scrolls' forbidden knowledge.
Within the Dead Sea Scrolls, one will find the most ancient versions of almost every single biblical book in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament.
When the fragments from Qumran were first pieced together, it became clear that this wasn't a random stash of scrolls. It was a genuine library, a curated collection that mixed scripture, commentary, community rules, and visionary writings. Roughly a quarter of the manuscripts turned out to be copies of Hebrew Bible books, and the rest were drawn from the wider religious literature circulating during that era. Texts like Jubilees and Enoch, alongside brand new works written by the community itself. The single most famous manuscript is the Great Isaiah Scroll. It's an unbroken roll of parchment nearly 24 feet long, an ancient scribe's marathon. It contains the full book of Isaiah written in Hebrew, and it's the oldest complete biblical book ever found. When scholars first unrolled it, they weren't peering at a few lines through machines or filters. They were looking directly at clear, inked letters that could still be read by the naked eye. Column after column of prophetic text rolled out before them, a full millennium older than the medieval manuscripts used in printed Bibles today. That one scroll alone changed how scholars understood what could survive on leather. It showed that entire books, not just fragments, could last for over 2,000 years when sealed away from air and moisture. More than that,
and inside that pottery jar is a leather scroll with some Hebrew writing on it.
it allowed experts to see how scribes of the late Second Temple period spelled, phrased, and copied their sacred texts. But the biblical copies were only one shelf of that ancient library. The rest of the collection came from the community's own scribes and their religious circle. Among the most famous are the Community Rule, the War Scroll, the Temple Scroll, and Songs of the Sabbath Sacrifice. There were also copies of Enoch, Tobit, and Jubilees, all popular texts in Jewish circles at the time. Taken together, the scrolls don't look like a single genre archive or a random stockpile. They look like the full bookshelf of a group that prayed, debated, and organized its life by its own codes. If you open the Community Rule, often labeled 1QS, you step straight into the inner world of that group. This isn't a general sermon. It's a detailed manual for membership. The text lays out how a newcomer joins, how long they serve on probation, what meals look like, how to stay pure, how to work, and what happens if you break a rule. It keeps returning to a figure called the maskil, which translates roughly to instructor or wise guide. The maskil's job is to train and oversee the group's initiates, the Sons of Light, as the members called themselves. His role isn't just to lecture, but to pass on raz, the Hebrew and Aramaic word for mystery, secret knowledge meant only for the faithful. Everyday life in the community was organized to the smallest detail. Members ate together at set times. They bathed in ritual water. They studied under the maskil and lived under a strict chain of command. Punishments weren't physical beatings or public shame. They were internal demotions, loss of rations, loss of rank, suspension from meals. Everything about the rule says discipline, hierarchy, and purity. The Community Rule wasn't the only voice speaking from those caves. Another key document, the Damascus document, was already known in part from medieval copies found in Cairo before the Dead Sea discoveries. The Qumran fragments confirmed and expanded it. The tone is different, more sermon than statute. It warns against breaking the Sabbath, against impurity, against abandoning the covenant, and it repeatedly references a leader known as the Teacher of Righteousness, a mysterious founding figure who guided the group's beliefs. Side by side, the two reveal a community trying to set itself apart from mainstream Judaism, drawing its own boundaries around Sabbath observance, ritual purity, and leadership. Then comes a letter that scholars call one of the great breakthroughs, 4QMMT, short for Miksat Ma'aseh HaTorah, some works of the law. It's a letter compiled from 6 manuscript fragments pieced together by Elisha Qimron and John Strugnell in the late 20th century. The letter has 3 parts: an introduction, a body listing around 24 legal rulings, and a closing appeal. Its tone isn't wild or prophetic. It's calm, almost bureaucratic. The rules it lists are deeply specific: how to handle sacred food, how to treat temple offerings, how to maintain purity among priests. These aren't abstract doctrines. They're fine points of religious law, what Jewish tradition calls halakha. The letter isn't meant for ordinary believers. It's clearly addressed to people with authority, perhaps high priests in Jerusalem, perhaps Hasmonean rulers who controlled the temple. The community is presenting its position, urging those in power to align with their stricter interpretation of Torah. And once again, all this could be read directly from the fragments, as edited and translated in the 1990s. If 4QMMT lays out law, the Temple Scroll builds an entire world around it. This massive work, stretching across 66 columns, is both a blueprint and a rule book for an ideal temple. A temple that had not yet been built, but was imagined as the perfect one. It expands on biblical laws about sacrifice, cleanliness, and access, weaving them into a single grand design. In the Temple Scroll, Jerusalem's sacred center is reimagined as a set of expanding squares. The innermost court for priests, a middle court for ritually pure men, and an outer court for the rest of Israel. Every layer gets stricter as you move inward. The closer to the center, the higher the purity demanded. From purity codes to military order. That's the jump made by the War Scroll, labeled 1QM. This text imagines a cosmic battle between the sons of light, the faithful community, and the sons of darkness, their worldly enemies. But this isn't vague prophecy. It's an organized field manual. It describes formations, armor, trumpets, banners, and battle prayers, all laid out in sequence. There's a rhythm to it. Priests blow trumpets to signal phases of battle. Fighters march in divisions. Prayers are recited at each step. The War Scroll even breaks into two major parts. The war against the Kittim, often taken to mean foreign oppressors, maybe Romans or Greeks, and the longer War of Divisions, which gives detailed military and ritual choreography. The text assumes everyone in it already belongs to the community and already believes the outcome is divinely ordained. All these writings, the rule, the Damascus document, the law letter, the temple plan, and the war manual orbit around one central idea: control. Control of knowledge, control of ritual, control of time itself. That last part becomes clear once you notice the calendar system that runs through many of the scrolls. Unlike the rest of Jewish society at the time, which followed a lunar solar calendar, this community used a 364-day solar calendar. It was perfectly tidy, 52 weeks exactly, divided evenly into seasons and festivals. In this system, every feast and Sabbath fell on the same weekday every year. It was predictable, mathematical, and closed to outside influence. Early editors spotted this pattern in texts like 4QMMT and other calendar lists. But in 2018, University of Haifa scholars Eshbal Ratzon and Jonathan Bendov cracked one of the last coded fragments, confirming the group's schedule of festivals in detail. Their reconstruction showed that the community celebrated familiar feasts like Shavuot, but also added new ones like the Festival of New Wine and Festival of New Oil. These extra observances stretched Harvest Thanksgiving over weeks. The point wasn't abundance, it was precision. They believed God's order in creation followed this solar rhythm, and any other calendar was corruption. The scholars of the mid-20th century gave us the words. Now, artificial intelligence is giving us the whispers between them, traces of ink, fibers, and strokes invisible to human eyes. When artificial intelligence met the ancient world, thousands of fragments are faded, cracked, or burned. Some are the size of a fingernail. Some look completely blank to the naked eye. In many cases, the writing exists only as microscopic traces of carbon and iron trapped in the surface fibers. That's where modern imaging and artificial intelligence step in. The first step is vision, literally. If you can't see the ink, nothing else matters. For years, research teams have been photographing every surviving piece of parchment or papyrus across many different wavelengths of light. This technique is called multispectral imaging. Instead of snapping a normal color photo, they shoot a stack of images using filters that isolate specific bands, from ultraviolet through visible light to near infrared. In some bands, ink that looks completely dead in daylight suddenly glows faintly gray or blue. Other wavelengths can filter out dark stains or make background fibers fade, letting the lettering stand out. That's why the Israel Antiquities Authority built its entire digital archive around this method. Each fragment is captured in high resolution under multiple wavelengths, using a camera system that minimizes handling. The parchment itself never leaves its climate-controlled tray. Instead, the light does the traveling. It's basic physics. The more kinds of light you use, the more chances you have to separate ink from skin, and the less risk you run of damaging something that's already 2,000 years old. That same logic, see what eyes can't, also applies to scrolls that are rolled tight, glued together, or burnt into brittle lumps. In the past, an archaeologist might have been tempted to pry them open with tools, destroying the surface. Now, instead of unrolling them, scientists scan them using micro-CT, a medical-style X-ray technique that slices an object into thousands of thin digital layers.
With the interior of the scroll modeled, he can then place the ink points detected during the scan onto the surface of each layer of the scroll.
Software then rebuilds the scroll in 3 dimensions and unwraps it virtually, peeling each layer back on screen. The first major success story for this was the Engedi scroll, a charred lump discovered near the Dead Sea that no one dared to open. Using this digital unwrapping method, researchers reconstructed the layers and found that the inside contained text from Leviticus. Every letter was legible, without a single physical touch. Even though the Engedi scroll wasn't from Qumran itself, it changed the rules for handling all Judean Desert material. Never force it open. Scan it, model it, and let the computer unfold it safely. Once the imaging is complete, the hard part begins, turning those raw images into information. The human eye can only pick out so much, so teams use computer vision software trained to detect faint brush traces, curves, and textures that hint at writing. In 2020, the John Rylands Library in Manchester re-examined 4 tiny scraps that had been labeled blank since the 1950s. With multispectral images and modern processing, editors could suddenly see ruled lines, a few stray letters, and even the word for Sabbath. Those letters had always been there, buried in the fibers. Different wavelengths and smarter algorithms simply made them visible again. That's what this kind of AI does best. After visibility comes authorship. Who actually wrote what? Even when you have clear letters, it can be hard to tell whether a long manuscript was copied by one scribe or several. To test this, in 2021, a team from the University of Groningen and Tel Aviv University ran a handwriting analysis study on the Great Isaiah Scroll.
Under lock and key for over 40 years, the Great Isaiah Scroll was stored underground in Jerusalem until displayed in 2008.
To every human observer, it looked like one seamless hand. But the algorithm they trained measured thousands of micro-features in each letter: the width of strokes, the angle of curves, the pressure implied by thickness. The model concluded that the scroll was written by 2 different scribes who wrote so similarly that even experts missed the transition. That discovery mattered for more than trivia. Scholars group fragments partly by handwriting, assuming that identical hands mean related manuscript. If 2 scribes contributed to the same scroll, that means handwriting alone can't always tell the whole story. It changes how editors cluster fragments, how they judge copying errors, and even how they calculate how much work individual scribes could have done. Without machine measurement, no one would have noticed the switch at all. But there's another layer, literally, in the material itself. Most scrolls are written on animal skin.
To understand this breakthrough, we must first understand what the scrolls are made of. The vast majority were written on parchment, a durable material made from processed animal skin.
so each carries microscopic traces of the animal's DNA. In 2020, researchers extracted and sequenced those traces, creating genetic fingerprints for dozens of fragments. When two scraps share almost identical DNA, they likely came from the same hide, or at least the same species. When the DNA is different, say, goat for one piece and sheep for another, what once seemed like a perfect fit suddenly doesn't add up. That study uncovered something striking. Not all of the scrolls in the Qumran caves were originally copied there. Some fragments carried genetic profiles that didn't match the local material, suggesting they were brought in from elsewhere. It explained why some puzzling fragments, long thought to belong together, never seemed to fit. The machine here isn't reading text, it's acting as a forensic witness, keeping editors from forcing pieces together that never belonged in the same manuscript. Before any of these images or DNA results reach scholars, they have to be cleaned, digitally, not physically. The raw photos contain rulers, color charts, labels, and dark plate backgrounds that confuse algorithms. So, computer vision teams developed segmentation pipelines that automatically remove everything except the actual parchment. The software isolates the skin, cuts out the plate markings, and produces a pure image, just ink and texture, nothing else. It sounds small.
Three-dimensional, volumetric scan of the damaged manuscript. This scan produces a set of cross-sectional images that show the internal structure of the scroll.
But that cleanup step stops the AI from mistaking a ruler mark or plate edge for a Hebrew letter. In this kind of work, fewer distractions mean fewer false readings. Then comes dating, arguably the most important and most debated frontier. For decades, the standard tool was paleography, the art of dating handwriting by style. Experts trained their eyes on known samples and said things like, "This script looks Hasmonean," or "This one's early Herodian." It's a skill that works, but it carries a broad margin of error, sometimes half a century or more. To tighten those margins, in 2025, a team led by Mladen Popovic introduced a combined approach using new radiocarbon tests and an AI handwriting model they nicknamed Enoch. First, they took fresh radiocarbon samples from scrolls that had never been properly cleaned before. Many pieces had been treated decades ago with castor oil to darken the surface for photography, treatment that contaminated earlier tests. Once the oil was removed, the new samples gave much cleaner results. Next, they trained the AI model using manuscripts whose ages were already known from these radiocarbon results. The model learned the subtle statistical features, the spacing, proportions, and curves that correlate with time. When applied to undated fragments, Enoch often pushed the estimated dates earlier than previous human judgments, and the pattern matched well with the new radiocarbon anchors. The key point isn't which century any one scroll belongs to, it's how the system learns. Scribes, being human, evolved their handwriting gradually. Over the decades, certain strokes tighten, angles shift, and connections between letters change. A seasoned paleographer can notice some of these changes by eye, but a trained model can measure thousands of them simultaneously and weight them statistically. When those measurements are tied to securely dated samples, the model becomes a calibrated timeline of handwriting evolution. Another modern assist comes in alignment software. Imagine you have a faded fragment with half a line of text. Somewhere else, you have a known transcription of the same passage. The software overlays the transcription on the image, letter by letter, and highlights where the visible strokes align or diverge. It's like putting tracing paper over a ghost sign on an old wall to check what parts of the lettering still survive. This isn't translation, it's precision checking, a way to confirm whether what you think you see in the ink is really there. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.